It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Bob Blackburn. He served as Executive Director of the Oklahoma Historical Society from 1999 through 2020. After joining the organization in 1980 and becoming Deputy Director in 1990, so nearly 30 years with the Oklahoma Historical Society. As a historian with a Ph.D. from Oklahoma State University, he has authored or co-authored 18 books and numerous articles. He is a steady source of historical information to the media and has appeared numerous times on the Historical Channel. Please assist me in welcoming Dr. Bob Blackburn.
You don't know how many times I've been introduced as Bob Blackburn. So for some reason, if you say my name quick, it'll come out that way. So good to be back here. I have been coming to this museum since 1976 when Steve Wilson was the director. I don't know if any of you may remember Steve, but he was writing his books on treasure tales of Oklahoma at the time, and I was writing books, and we just had a good time together. So I love what Bart has been able to do here, and was real honored when he asked me to come and speak. Last year I gave a similar speech, so if you were at the meeting in Edmond when Amy asked me to speak there, it may sound a little familiar because it's the same outline, but I never speak from prepared text, so it's always a little different each time I give a presentation. And Amy last year, she had a person with a board or something with your timing, and I appreciate the clock here. I'll try to keep this within time. But thank you for the timekeeper last year. You kept it on schedule too. You did a good job. But today, a little bit about the New Deal in Oklahoma. And I don't want to repeat what some of your other guest speakers have talked about. But I always talk about individuals and communities who enter a stage of history with both challenges and opportunities. So you can write a biography that way. You can write a story of parks in Oklahoma City that I just finished with challenges and opportunities as each generation walks onto that stage. You can use it, recovery from the Civil War, statehood, the land runs, the attack on tribal sovereignty, whatever it is, same thing, walking onto a stage of history. So to understand the New Deal, though, and the programs that would transform so much of American culture and governance, you have to understand the conditions. First, you have to realize that Oklahoma in the 1920s, you might bump it or something here.
Raise you up just a little bit.
Okay.
Yep.
I can't help it. My arm. I started speaking. Let me grab my notes here. I felt like I'm in a Methodist church. No one wants to sit on the front row. To be singled out is the way to not do something. But the hard times are really different in rural Oklahoma and urban Oklahoma coming into the 1930s. Rural Oklahoma was still where most Oklahomans lived at the time, because the transition from public and tribal lands to individually owned lands had been going on since 1889 with the allotment of the 5 tribes' lands. You had farmers who saw a new opportunity out on the frontier where the soil was fresh and they could get land cheaply with the Homestead Act, or get cheap land among the 5 tribes area. Here they come, farmers from all these distressed communities around the country, bringing their Scots-Irish culture with them, which wanted limited government, that trusted officials from their valley, going back to the Scots culture of the Highlands, of this sense of individual liberty. Don't mess with a gun on my hip. Don't tell me what to do with my life. A fear of centralized government, and especially if centralized government is way over there in Oklahoma City or Washington, D.C. That's the culture that came with those hard-pressed immigrants who settled on the land. Well, fortunately for them, from 1898 to 1911, agriculture boomed in Oklahoma. These were the golden years of agriculture in the entire country, but even more so in Oklahoma, where we had the fresh soil. We had more railroad lines built from 1900 to 1910 than all other decades combined. So as the railroads spread out to the little towns, suddenly transportation costs went down. Importing goods into the general store came down. And farmers and ranchers are doing better than ever on the American frontier. Oklahoma was one of the fastest growing states in the nation, going from 5 congressmen in 1907 to 9 congressmen by 1930. And if you understand that representation, as your population grows in comparison to the rest of the country, you get more congressional seats. Well, now we're back to where we should have been without that boom. The other thing adding to rural Oklahoma's prosperity was oil. First big oil boom, 1905 at Glencoe, and then there, every year after almost, here comes the oil patch settlers from the mid-Atlantic, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, southern New York, southern Illinois. Here they come. And they start discovering, and as technology changes, the opportunities grow, going from the first oil well that we know of that produced at least 2 barrels a day was in Chelsea in 1889 with the spring pole. Then it goes to cable tool. Then it goes to rotary. Of course, now we're into horizontal. But oil was going all these years building these towns and adding to the capital funds in banks that could be loaned to farmers and ranchers. Urban area, the same thing. Tulsa and Oklahoma City are larger than any single city in Arkansas, Kansas, or New Mexico around. Of course, Texas is kind of another story. But oil built Oklahoma urban communities. And as the oil flowed, here comes the money into the cities, the banks grow, more investment, more people coming in. Oklahoma City, the fastest growing city in the nation, from 1900 to 1910, 10,000 to 64,000 people. That's what was happening in the state. And Tulsa, of course, the oil capital of the world, in the center of those early oil fields in 1905, and these big companies and corporations that could afford to advance enough money to drill wells and to keep going and buy production. Tulsa was growing almost as fast as Oklahoma City. Then came droughts. 1911 to 1918 is the most devastating extended drought in Oklahoma history. 1911 to 1918, 7 years. Crops failed. There was 1 year, almost every crop failed in the entire state. Oklahoma City went into another depression in 1911. Tulsa had oil, not quite so much. And then farmers began to rebound a little bit during World War I with demand for agricultural products to fight a war. And as Europe is being devastated, the market for mules and horses and cattle is going up. Farmers and ranchers are doing well. Spinning out of World War I, though, starts a downward decline. At one point in the 1920s, not 30s, 20s, cotton gets down to 3 cents a pound. At a time when it costs 2.5 cents to have it picked by outside pickers. So unless you're like my family, my mom and her 7 siblings, that she had a bunch of kids to go pick it, you couldn't make any money with cotton even. And that was the cash crop in Oklahoma. And so Oklahoma farmers, ranchers are suffering in the 1920s. Well, here comes stock market crash, 1929. Industrial crisis, banks begin to fail. People are losing confidence. We talk now about consumer confidence. That's tracked almost daily. It was in the paper again this morning in the New York Times. Consumer confidence probably wasn't tracked, but it just went in the tank. People were losing faith that their governments, county government, city government, state government, federal government, were really there for their benefit. Losing faith in banks to hold on to the assets, to loan to help drive the community. And so we have almost a moral crisis in the country. Even before the Great Depression spreads to Oklahoma, oil makes a difference for a while. The Oklahoma City field comes in December of 1928, flooding the state again with money. Oil is being produced, creating jobs. People like Robert S. Kerr of cable drilling with a drilling company out of Ada is making a lot of money drilling these wells. So even into 1930, And investors are still thinking, well, we're going to build the first national bank building in Oklahoma City. The Ramsey brothers say, we're going to build another 31-story tower next to it. In 1930, Bill Skirvin, an oil man who had made his fortune in Texas, said, well, I'm going to build another hotel even better than the Skirvin Tower. 1930. Well, finally, the Depression comes in Oklahoma. Those projects are suffering. Farmers are already down on their knees in terms of being able to hang on and produce. By 1935, we estimate that 23% of all Oklahomans are unemployed. And that's largely in the urban areas. Well, in rural America, where the farmers could not make their payments, or the banks failed, is that it gets even worse. So unemployment was spreading to small town Oklahoma. People were losing faith. And unfortunately for Oklahoma at the time, we had a governor named Alfalfa Bill Murray, who was a 19th century populist. He feared big government. He didn't want to grow programs. His idea of fighting the Great Depression in Oklahoma was to plant the governor's mansion to potatoes that people could come in and get for free, kind of a food bank kind of approach. So he was not reaching out and helping. Counties, of course, had their commodities at the time, the poor farms that every county had. County commissioners could do a little bit, but typically not enough. They didn't have the resources. As ad valorem tax receipts were going down with failures. And so, really, it was getting to a point by 1932 of hopelessness. But there was a new man running for President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt, who said, we need something better than what we've had. He's elected in a landslide, takes office in 1933, and pretty much comes up with a new slogan called the New Deal. Is that Americans deserve a new deal, not just the old platitudes and the old ways of this relationship between citizens and their governments, but a new way of looking at it. And they start experimenting. To help those farmers and ranchers, they come up with the American Agricultural Act. But it really hurts more Oklahomans than it helps. It's largely designed to help the big producers. Because we had overproduction in the 1920s with tractors and mechanized ways of planting and harvesting and producing and transporting. Overproduction is driving the prices down. Agricultural Act, let's reduce the acreage being planted. Let's reduce the number of cattle. Let's reduce the number of hogs and chickens and everything else. Well, who does that hurt? That cash is flowing to the landowners and the producers. It's not going to the tenant farmers. People like my granddad, who happened to be on the other side of the Arkansas line in Howard County, Arkansas, suddenly had no way to make ends meet. Could not even generate that $200 a year he needed in cash to feed the family as a sharecropper. If you've seen the movie Grapes of Wrath or read the book by Steinbeck, those are the people displaced and are going to California. Those tenant farmers are being driven off. If you own land, sometimes you can hang on by mortgaging again or just asking for relief. The tenant farmers, though, are being driven off. Here they go to California. The Dust Bowl, the Okies going out. Roosevelt also starts experimenting with industry. How do we limit production? How do we get industries to work together? Again, not very successfully. Supreme Court, very conservative, starts striking down some of these early programs. He would get all the way to programs like the Indian New Deal, trying to deal with an issue with American Indian tribes that by 1898 were no longer going to be recognized by the federal government. The idea that let's get away from this identity as tribal members, make everyone a good little American. Well, in the 1930s, they recognized the problems in the Indian community. Indian New Deal, giving tribal people the chance to gather again as corporate entities, not tribal entities, not yet. But it's another step towards what we now call tribal sovereignty and constitutional government among the tribes. So they were experimenting. Well, what you probably remember about the New Deal, the most popular programs, would have been the make work programs. How can we get out and take all of these unemployed people who are desperate, some turning to socialism and communism, some losing faith that the American system of democracy and our system of governance can really work for us, questioning. So the Huey Longs of the world, the demagogues, are saying, hey, let's do something different, totally different, radically different. Roosevelt, kind of down the middle of the line, says, let's relieve the unemployed. Let's put food back on the table. Let's give these people dignity again, that they have value. So he had to come up with programs that did not compete with free enterprise. He wasn't that radical. He said, no, free enterprise is good. How do we save it? The banking holiday had been an example of trying to save the banks. FDIC comes along to insure those, so as a depositor, I now know that I'm going to be covered. So he's working on little things like that in free enterprise, but he says the Make Work Project should do things that free enterprise cannot do. That it's not financially, kind of like PBS and NPR, if you saw the news last night. That's the case they're making. If NPR and PBS aren't there, commercial, even on the internet, is not going to take that up. So there's some things government can do very effectively for quality of life. Make work project. Well, here in Oklahoma, as the three main projects that I'm going to summarize here in my last 5 minutes would have been the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCs, the Works Progress Administration, WPA, and the Public Works Administration, PWA. Those three come out at different times. Well, here in Oklahoma, Alfalfa Bill does not want the regulations that come with PWA and WPA grants. Couldn't do anything about the CCs. It's administered by the War Department. Soldiers are reactivated, put in charge of camps, and over 60-some camps are established in Oklahoma within the first year. Under the supervision of the Army, efficiency, systems in place to manage these kind of resources, bringing in the National Park Service, the Forestry Service for design issues, and working with Francis Perkins and the Labor Department to come up with lists of people who need to be able to work for the dignity, for the food on the table. Well, the CCs comes up, this is for largely unemployed young men, 18 to 25, but also veterans of any age. $30 a month, 25 of it would go home to put food on the table. But it gave them education, it gave them structure in their lives, it gave them recreational opportunities and hard work for physical benefits. Well, in Oklahoma, 2 of those camps were established at Fort Sill. At least one camp, if not more, someone in here might correct me, in the refuge that had been set aside in 1901 before the lottery. Oklahoma City gets 3 camps. Tulsa gets 1. Mohawk Park was built by a CC camp. Oklahoma City, if you're familiar with Lincoln Park and with Will Rogers Park, there are CC camps in both. Most of the physical remnants you see there now came from the CCs. Much of it finished by the WPA. But the CCs mainly go into rural Oklahoma, conservation. Things private enterprise was never going to do, with windbreaks, with dam control, with controlling erosion, and going in and planting. And they're doing great work in rural Oklahoma, providing employment for those kids. And then along comes the WPA. As my mom grew up in these years, she said, oh yeah, we call that we piddle around. But anyway, it gave jobs to people. The maximum they could work was 130 hours a month. But that put food on the table. It gave them the dignity that they deserved and gave them the jobs doing good work around the state. They were working on sidewalks, public buildings, armories. There were more than 51 armories built in Oklahoma by the PWA and PWA together. Half of the money went to road development. Route 66 that had been started and inaugurated in 1926 was not finished until WPA crews paved the last portion of Route 66 in 1937. So it was making a difference in roads, which affected commerce, which affected the price of goods, giving jobs to people, improving flood control, utilities, sanitation. And then when combined with co-ops that were putting in rural electric systems, one of the first in the country, most successful, Cimarron Electric Co-op in Kingfisher. If anybody in here is from Kingfisher, but turned into Pioneer Telephone Company. But all of this together was impacting the quality of life in Oklahoma. The WPA would not just get into building roads and armories, but they also had an art project with people like Nan Sheets as the state director, whose concept was art should not just be for the rich. You can go buy the art, put it in their homes, and enjoy it. Art should be for everybody, every day. It should be part of our education in schools with art teachers. It should be part of our lives to go to free, accessible museums to see art. It should be for classes on how to become a better artist. And the art project worked across the state. There was a music project sponsored by WPA. The state orchestra started in Tulsa. Tulsa said, now we can do it better ourselves. Moved to Oklahoma City. The Oklahoma Philharmonic, Oklahoma City Philharmonic, is a successor to that first WPA orchestra started in 1935. And then the Writers Project, to put unemployed writers to work. That was headquartered at the Oklahoma Historical Society. At one point we had almost 75 people crammed into that old building on Lincoln Boulevard working on WPA. Today, if you've done research in Oklahoma history, you've probably accessed the Indian Pioneer Papers, all done under supervision of the WPA. The early indexes to newspapers in Oklahoma. We've been collecting newspapers in Oklahoma since 1893, going in and indexing them so you have access to what's in the newspapers. And so much was done by the Writers Project. Well, these programs together did make an impact on Oklahoma. For example, some of the statistics here. The 51 armories built at a cost of $3.5 million. In just 3 years, 1935 to 1937, the WPA and PWA programs together brought $59 million to Oklahoma, going out to families, the food on the table. If you calculate that with inflation, in 2025, that would be $1.3 billion, with a B, $1.3 billion was invested in our communities, and not just making a tangible impact, but for dignity and hope that the future will be better than it was today. When David Baird, professor at OSU, did a survey of WPA buildings in 1982 for a survey for the Oklahoma Historical Society, he found 1,344 buildings still around. We have photographs in the collections. Those aren't online, are they? Are they online? So you can still access those photographs if you're looking at your own community in those WPA, PWA programs. Well, things would change by 1939. War in Europe started creating a demand for American products, American services. People like Fred Jones, who wrote his biography a few years ago, who had 4 dealerships in Oklahoma City and Tulsa, was asked to be $1 a year man to go to Washington, D.C. to try to coordinate the industrial response to this growing need for weaponry, for machines and things that could help keep democracy alive. Well, he did a survey of industrial sites in Oklahoma. Yes, we have metal workers in Lawton. Yes, we have these engineers in Oklahoma City. And together, we can be part of this building up to fight war. And as the economy started improving in 39 and 40, the need for make work becomes less and less. That's when a lot of Oklahomans left and went to California for those jobs in the war industry. I had an uncle who left in 34, kind of bummed around for a while at Bakersfield and other communities, finally got a job in Los Angeles building ships. That was very typical of many. We lost more people in the 1940s in Oklahoma than we did in the 1930s. speaking of migration. But the Make Work programs are coming to an end by 40 and 41. Well, what it did for Oklahoma, it left behind that physical legacy. You can see, what is it, over 60 dams in the refuge. Someone here know that figure? 60 some is the last figure I saw. I don't know if they're all still around, but there were 60 built over the years. The road up to Mount Scott was built by WPA and a combination of PWA funds. The Holy City was built by these Make Work workers, including the chapel, where Bob Blackburn was married on June 11th, 1978 in that chapel. That's a personal connection that I have with WPA work. Well, today we remember the physical part, but for our grandparents' generation, it was hope, it was dignity, and it was food on the table. The legacy of the New Deal is still with us, the generations who have benefited from a generation that seized opportunity, dealing with a challenge, creating more opportunities for our parents' generation and our generation, hopefully our children's and our grandchildren's. The New Deal was a model of how we can work together for the benefit of everyone. And we need to keep that spirit in mind as we go to the polls to elect officials to lead this great country called America. Thank you very much.